If you grew up watching Disney movies, then there's a good chance you've stumbled upon the stories of a princess or two. But what you might not know is that some of these princesses have some pretty dark origins. Before we jump into it, be sure to subscribe to the taco and give this video a big thumbs up. Now, let's take a look at the untold truth about Disney princesses. Cinderella. Cinderella is one of the most iconic Disney princesses. Her rags to riches story has been encouraging women to find their own Prince Charming for decades. But you might be surprised to learn the real Cinderella wasn't all talking mice and pretty songs. If you remember Disney's version of the story, then you know her stepmother was pretty vicious. In the original, by the Grimm brothers, that was still the case, but her biological father was cruel to her as well. Oh, and it should be noted that her real name is Aschenputtel, and she has the ability to disappear. And it's not a fairy godmother that grants her magical makeover. Instead, it's a magic tree she planted over her mother's grave. In the original tale, Cinderella waters the tree with her tears. In return, the magical tree gives Cinderella beautiful dresses. We can see why Disney went with a much more fun fairy godmother. In the original story, Cinderella actually loses a gold slipper because the prince sets up a trap when she kept running away from him at the ball. When she lost her shoe, the prince searched the whole kingdom and Cinderella's father made it his mission to keep the two apart. Thankfully, in the end, the prince found Cinderella and surprise, surprise, the slipper fit, and the two lived happily ever after. Mulan. There are a few things Disney got right about Mulan. She was a fierce Chinese warrior, and her story is almost as old as time. The legendary Hua Mulan has been inspiring young Chinese people since the 5th century. As the original story goes, or one of the many versions, there was a great war in China. Because of that, Mulan's father gets drafted to join the army. He had every intention of going because he didn't want to dishonor his family. Mulan wasn't having any of it because she feared her father was too old to serve. So instead, she took his armor and his place and became a great warrior. In many versions of the story, like Disney's, there was a love interest, and then in others, there was not. What is really interesting about Mulan's tale was that she had no magical powers. This is a common theme in Chinese folklore, and because of this, many believe Mulan is based on a real story. Sadly, there is no actual evidence of someone like Mulan ever existing. This is especially true because the women of her time were expected to be completely submissive, which means if there were a real Mulan, her father would have never allowed her to take his place. Pocahontas. Over the years, there have been various stories about what actually happened to Pocahontas. In Disney's version, she was a beautiful Native American princess who fell in love with John Smith. While the people in this story actually existed, their relationship in real life was dramatically different than Disney's fairy tale. One thing that might shock you is that her real name wasn't Pocahontas. That was actually a nickname given to her, which means playful one. What might shock you even more is the fact that in real life, Pocahontas was not in love with John Smith. That was actually a story Smith made up to show common ground between the English and the natives. Scholars say the real-life Pocahontas was even more clever and robust than the fictional one we see in the movie. She was later captured, and upon her release she had to marry another John Rolfe. She eventually went back to England with Rolfe, where she became a symbol of peace. Then, on her way back home to the New World, she fell ill and passed away. She was believed to be 21 years old at the time. Elsa. Thanks to Disney's Frozen, pretty much everyone knows every word to the song Let It Go. And while the movie that inspired the song was full of lovable and encouraging moments, the original story is not. Let's just say Disney took many liberties when making their version of a not-so-classic fable. If they would have stuck true to the original tale, there's a chance it wouldn't have been the favorite of toddlers and tweens around the world. The movie is actually inspired by the story of the Snow Queen. And you might be surprised to learn it doesn't even involve sisters, but instead young lovers who break an icy spell. The gist of the story is a young kid is kidnapped by the Snow Queen, who takes him to her palace. She says she will release him if he can complete a certain task. While he is doing this, the love of his life is searching to find him. She befriends a reindeer that tells her how to break the spell and get her man back, and it involves the purity of a child's heart. The girl and the reindeer reach the Snow Queen's palace, and she finds her love and kisses him. That breaks the spell, and now we know why Disney went a different route. Tiana. When it comes to Disney's The Princess and the Frog, pretty much everything is different from the real tale. The original, in this case, was really titled The Frog King, and it painted a very different picture of Disney's Tiana. You can probably already guess that the original tale didn't take place in New Orleans, instead it was set in a fairy tale kingdom. And the lovable Tiana wasn't so lovable in the original either. She was actually the antagonist and happened to be the most beautiful of the king's daughters. The princess had a habit of throwing a golden ball in the air in her spare spare time. One day, her ball falls in a well and she starts to cry until a frog says he will help her get it back. All he asks is that she becomes his friend. She agrees but runs away without him after getting her ball back. He eventually catches up with her, and when her father learns about her broken promise, he makes her fulfill it. That means the princess must eat, sleep, and hang out with the frog. That is, until one day she was so over it that she threw the frog against a wall. He then turned into a prince, and she decided he was okay to run away with and get married. There was actually no kiss in the original tale. Who knew? Snow White. She was the first Disney princess, but her story is much older than the 1937 movie Snow White. This is another tale we have to thank the Brothers Grimm for putting to paper. It is believed the story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs had been around since the Middle Ages. In fact, Snow White might have been based on a real person. Though it is still debated, some believe the real Snow White was Marguerite von Waldeck, a German countess born in the 1500s. When she was 16 years old, she was forced to move away from her kingdom by her stepmother. Sound familiar? While she was away, she fell in love with a prince who ended up being Philip II of Spain. Apparently, their parents were too thrilled about the romance, and by the time Marguerite was 21, she passed away from being poisoned. Again, sound familiar? You are probably wondering where the dwarfs come in. This theory states that Marguerite's father owned a mine that employed young children to work in it. Those that survived the horrific job ended up having severely stunted growth, therefore giving them dwarf-like appearances. Moana. You might want to take a seat for this next revelation because it's bound to floor you. Moana isn't from Hawaii, and for those of you who think she's from New Zealand, you would also be mistaken. According to experts and subtle hints from the movie's directors, Moana is Polynesian, though it's not clear her specific origin. On the other hand, Maui, her troublemaking demigod friend, is from Hawaiian mythology. The movie pulls from legends all across the Polynesian culture. We also are sad to tell you that Moana wasn't based on any real-life person. She was entirely invented by Disney filmmakers. If you are familiar with any Hawaiian or Polynesian mythology, then you already know the goddess Te Fiti isn't real either. Instead, many believe her character is based on the goddess Pele. Pele is known for creating the Hawaiian Islands. She is also known for her fantastic power, jealousy, and passion. But it's the legend of Maui finding out that the Hawaiian goddess of fire was keeping a secret fire that is most like the movie. Maui convinces her to give it to him, much like Te Fiti's heart. The goddess then transforms and starts attacking Maui with fire, much like the movie, and he ends up beating her by turning into a hawk, similar to what he did in the film. Belle. The true story of the real Beauty and the Beast is pretty tragic. When he was born, Petrus Gonçalves had a rare disease that left his whole body and face covered in hair. Because of this, he was considered a second-class citizen. He was locked in a cage and fed raw meat. Then he was shipped to King Henry II as a coronation present, and things got a little bit better. The king didn't see Petrus as a pet and decided to start educating him and treating him like a human. He eventually learned 3 languages and received a royal education. Then, after the king passed away, Petrus became the property of his widower. She had the grand idea to marry him off to a beautiful maiden named Catherine. Yes, in real life, Belle's name was Catherine. The two didn't meet until their wedding day, but they did have a marriage that lasted over 40 years. They even had 7 children together. Sadly, 4 of the children suffered from the same disease as their dad and were sold off as pets when they got older. Needless to say, we prefer Disney's version much better. Rapunzel. The real story of Rapunzel is a doozy compared to the Disney version. In the tale by the Grimm brothers, Rapunzel is given to a witch because her parents stole the witch's herbs. Of course, this witch locks her away in a tower with no door and apparently no haircuts. Her hair ends up growing to around 30 feet and gains the attention of a passing prince. Pretending to be a witch, the prince climbs up Rapunzel's hair and finds her in the tower. She was startled, but not enough to start a relationship with the prince. The pair grows really close and eventually get physical, and Rapunzel gets pregnant. The problem is, she had no idea what was going on. That's because she lived in a tower her whole life and no one told her how babies work. On the other hand, the witch knew precisely what was going on and banished Rapunzel to a desert. She cut off her hair in the process and tricked the prince who climbed up to the tower to realize Rapunzel was gone. He falls out of the tower and goes blind. Sadly, Rapunzel has twins in the desert by herself. Thankfully, the couple finds each other several years later, and Rapunzel's tears of joy cure the prince's blindness. Ariel. We bet you always thought The Little Mermaid was written for girls. Well, you are mistaken, because the real story written by Hans Christian Andersen was written for a man. Apparently, Hans was in love with a man who didn't return his affections. Because of this, he came up with the story of Star-Crossed Lovers. You might also be shocked to learn that it was initially written as a letter to the man that he was in love with. In the original story, Ariel saved a sailor, much like the movie, so that's good. But he didn't remember who she was, so she went to the Sea Witch to get legs to walk on land. The Sea Witch rips out her tongue, which we didn't see in the movie. She also told Ariel if she got the prince to marry her quick enough, she would let her keep her legs. Sadly, that didn't happen, and she morphed back into a mermaid. When that happened, Ariel threw herself in the water and turned into sea foam. We aren't sure what that is all about, but Hans made sure to let everyone know she went to mermaid heaven. So we guess that's some sort of silver lining? Which real Disney princess backstory is your favorite? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to give us a thumbs up. Thanks for watching!